Welcome to Allies or Enemies. I'm Jess.
And I am Sean, and today we are talking about all of the Everdell expansions and ranking them from worst to best.
It was a few weeks ago that we got the complete collection, which I am very excited about because this is my number one favorite game. And already we've dove into it and have played it a ton. We played with the expansions we already knew and played with the new expansions that are included.
And speaking of the other stuff as well, we're just going to rank the big expansions. So the 5 big main expansions. All of the other things, the legendary cards, the extra cards, the through the seasons farm cards, we figured just put them in. You may as well just throw them all in. But for the most part, it's just kind of a few more cards in an already very large deck. So they're not going to make an enormous impact, but these 5 expansions will make a big impact.
So let's start with our number 5. Number 5 is Mistwood, and what that allows you to do is play solo with a fully solo operated character called Nightweave, but you can also add it to a 2-player game to make it feel a little bit more like 3 players. Now, just as a caveat, we have this one last because I'm not a big solo player, so for me, it's probably going to be the expansion that I play with the least.
Yeah, it really is just a matter of, for the largest number of people, this is probably the one that they're going to want the least because you're specifically just going to want this for solo. There is a way to bring Nightwave into 2-player games and add an extra player, and we have tried that as well, and it works fine. But honestly, we find the 2-player game fine, so we didn't think it was really necessary, and the upkeep, although not a huge amount of upkeep, was enough that we just felt like we probably aren't going to do that much.
But if you do play solo, it does add a lot of interesting elements. It is a really full solo game because there's lots of different components that you can add in and play with. So sometimes you might add a plan card or a plot card and different personalities. And all of those are ways to mix it up a little bit so it's not always playing against the same type of AI.
Yeah, it uses a deck of cards, and the cards use kind of a primary and then a secondary, if the primary is already filled, action that Nightweave's going to take. And it is like a head-to-head as well. So this isn't a best score solo mode. This is a you're trying to beat Nightweave's score, and you can level that up as well. So there's 5 or 6 different levels. I think
5 maybe.
Yeah, and we've beat it on 3, but just like by 2 points, I think. So it's definitely tough, and I think at the highest level you got to play an almost perfect game to beat Nightweave too. So there is a real challenge to it, and it works with all of the expansions.
Yeah, it is interesting because it gives you the adjustments to make and then how the Nightweave's behavior would change or things you have to do if you're adding in Pearlbrook or Bellaire. So it does let you add in any of the other expansions and play against the Nightweave AI.
But even though we do like it, it is number 5 on our overall list. At number 4, we have got Pearlbrook. And Pearlbrook, I will add the caveat, when we first purchased Pearlbrook, we bought the retail version. The retail version does this thing that really annoys me, where they put it into the collector's edition box. They use the same box for both. And so you end up with like an 80% empty box with just a few things in it. If they'd put it in a smaller box, I probably would like it more. But what it does is it adds a little kind of pond area. And you get to use frogs that you add to whoever your characters are. And so you're taking those frogs, you're putting them out into the Pearlbrook area. And that gets you pearls, is obviously. It also gets you special cards, which give you special powers. And it changes out the 4 main goals on the board to make them wonders instead that you have to pay extra resources in order to buy.
And one of the key resources that it adds are the pearls, and the pearls look amazing. They're like everything for Everdell. It looks incredible, and the way the board slots in too, it joins it up so nicely. So the production is great. And then those pearls you're trying to collect, because you have to collect a lot of resources, a lot of the short supply of pearls to purchase those really high point value wonders, which will make a huge difference, because I think the highest one is
20 points?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, but it is, I guess the tricky with Pearlbrook is the game's already a fairly tight resource management game, and it gives you another place that you have to put quite a few of your resources into to get those points, and it makes that rush for like the highest two wonders really, really important. And it takes out the standard goals, which I do kind of like, because I like just being able to get rewarded for having sets of the different colors of the different kinds of villagers. So it does replace that, but it's nice for kind of a change of pace.
Our number 3 is Spirecrest, and Spirecrest slots in at the bottom of the board, and it adds a little expedition rabbit. And so what you're doing is you are moving along each season this rabbit, and as you go, various things get added in. First of all, depending on what season it is, there is going to be a restriction. And that's part of the element that we don't like the most, because we love being able to go where we want to go. And that restriction might be that you collect one less of each of the resources, or you can't go to certain spots. So it does just make it a bit harder. And then you also get to pick a really powerful card, which is sometimes going to be these giant meeples that come with saddles, so you can actually slot in your own character meeples onto these giant animal ones. And those are great.
Yeah, that is really the selling point, is that you can have like a turtle riding a bear around, and it is really fun, and they are fairly powerful too. Like, they give you really cool one time a season effects for whatever meeple is kind of locked in there. That's now kind of a super meeple that goes out onto the board, which is great. But yeah, the negative side of that, the season's weather cards that negatively affect you are a little bit tough and feel a smidge out of place in a game that otherwise is all kind of like positive, and then it's this little bit of restriction. Some people might love that, and you can play without it, although you're going to end up with oodles of stuff without that. It's kind of the push-pull of it. And speaking of the push-pull, there's also an expedition trail that you've got to fill. And so that, again, like Pearlbrook, is a way that you're using extra resources, or that you really want to redirect your resources to that expedition.
Yeah, each season you collect a token that denotes what you think you're going to have at the end of the game, and then you've got to progress through it in order. So if the first one you have, you get points maybe for having 3 berries, for example. But you have to make sure you have that to be able to do the next one. So it does give you this pool of resources. It's a mix of the typical resources and cards, depending on which token you pick, to trade in for points at the end. So if you've mastered base game Everdell, then the Spirecrest Expedition is great, because if you typically have leftover stuff, this is a way of being able to trade that stuff in for points.
Yeah, and I think we've definitely found that. We've gotten to the point where generally by the end of fall, we can only fit 1 or 2 more buildings. So it is nice to have another place to go outside of just getting rid of your cards for a few points, which isn't the most fun way to spend turns. So it is nice to have these other things to do as well.
And it can be a bit of a challenge, because the ones that are the more stuff to have at the end are worth the most. So you have to decide, is it worth pushing your luck a little bit and thinking that you can do it, or take one of the easier ones that gets you less points. But that's our number 3.
Our number 2 is the other new one other than Mistwood, and that is Newleaf. And Newleaf is probably the best looking of the expansion boards. It adds this cool train station. It also adds 3 more meadow cards that you put into the Newleaf meadow. It also adds, and this is probably the coolest thing, is these little I think they're called visitor cards. And those give you endgame goals, but they're endgame goals that you can work towards. So whereas all of the other ones that are out on the board, all of the different award cards are always, once you've completed it, you can race to it. These are more of a thing that you're striving towards.
The personal goal element of it really makes it great, because then it might steer you both in different directions in a way that isn't quite maybe seen in the other games. So the visitor cards definitely add a lot.
Yeah, and there's also, because of the train station element of it as well, there's 3 different train cards, and those give you bonus resources when you take the cards on that board, or when you take the visitors. And
then it adds even more things, and one of the things it adds is a reservation token. And so what that allows you to do is to take a card from the meadow and to put it under your reservation token, and that lets you build it for 1 less resource. But you have to build it by the end of the season, or you lose the card. But having it be one resource cheaper is amazing. It makes some of the other cards a little bit more doable. And then the other aspect are the tickets. And so the tickets is something that you can use twice in a game to move an already placed worker. So again, it's just getting more stuff and being able to do more things.
And it's got more regular deck cards than any of the other, I think, than all of the other expansions combined. It's got a ton of regular deck cards that it adds to the deck. And a lot of those buildings give you a way to put any of the villagers, or sometimes it'll be like any like leaf villager or any book villager or whatever it might be, into those different locations. But you can only do it 3 times in a game. You get special doors, or they're like gold leaf doors that you can put out throughout the game, and those let you just steal anybody, which is really cool if you actually get the any one or the any flower one, and then you can just like snatch up a queen or a king. Which it's an interesting little wrinkle into it as well.
And if you're finding the cards don't turn over that much, so it's hard to get the exact critter that's needed for a very particular building, these cards help fix that by giving you those 3 options to kind of broaden it out about who can live there, which is wonderful.
Yeah, it's a great way to be able to, because that would really be the complaint of adding a ton of cards as this does to the deck is, well, now I'm never going to get a combination. So it does make kind of an alternate way to make those combinations. It does make it harder to make the combinations, but if you've played Everdell a ton, and we've played it a ton, you're a little tired of always matching those same cards to the same things over and over and over, of putting the rabbit into the shop and putting the hedgehog doctor into the hospital. All of those things, you've gotten tired of it by now. So it is nice to have that mix.
And that brings us to number 1. And number 1 is Bellaire. And what this adds to the game is more just kind of tightening and improving the base game, rather than a big giant thing. So it's not adding the wonders of Pearlbrook or the expedition of Spirecrest, but instead it fixes a few little things that from the base game could use a little bit of improvement.
Yeah, it adds a board that goes onto the top. And one of the cool things with the expansion is each one of them slots in to the main board. And if you've got all 4 out, it does look really cool because they all lock in and just make this enormous board that you're going to need a big table for. But Bellaire, what it adds is, first of all, it adds that board on the top, and it changes the goals, which I think was super important, because those endgame awards or endgame goals in the original were all like get an undertaker and like a barge toad, and you probably don't want both of those things. They don't even lock together, and it's so specific that it's really hard to get. This they just make a lot more sense, where it's like have 3 greens and 2 purples, or have 6 of whatever this thing is. And it also adds this large market spot that gives you another way to get all of the different resources and more cards.
And part of the market action as well is it's a really kind of clever, once you take that action, it moves to the bottom. And then that lets you take it in an opposite way where you can spend those. So near the end of the game, if you have a lot of leftover cards, a lot of leftover resources, you can spend those for points, because it gives you coins to move it back up to the top, which is great. And it adds a nice, what is it called? The Garden Award?
The Garland Award?
Garland Award. So it's a random award that comes out in terms of who has the most of this particular type of building/critters. And another of the base game ones as well, because it's like having each of the different types is one of the awards that you can go for, the basic events. And it's nice to have that option if you have a really diversified town.
Yeah, right. The Harvest Award. And most importantly, and we should have started with this, it adds asymmetric critter powers. And so each of the critters has a little mini card, and that card gives you some different thing. They're all kind of very specific, but they do change things up quite a bit. And we love using all the different critters. That's one of the main reasons that we got the big box, was because we hated that we didn't have the platypuses and the axolotls especially.
I think that's the tricky thing if you were to get Bellaire on its own without the collector's edition and without having the rest of the collector's editions as well, is seeing the cards from everybody that you don't have. Because before we had everybody, we were using like the axolotl card with like the squirrels and being like, we're pretending, but it's so much better just to have the meeples.
Yeah, it is. Actually, I wouldn't do that though. Only Jess did that. I refused. I will only use the correct ones with the correct ones. But Bellaire, the reason that it's number one, even though it's the smallest box, it's the least stuff in the box, we use it every single game. It's the only one that I would say is it's just an every time. You just want to throw that in there right from the start. It's like Carcassonne with the Inns and Cathedrals, where it's just, you just think of that as part of the base game, and that's totally how we think of Bellaire. Any of the problems you had with the base game, Bellaire tweaks them just that little bit without it being too much, without it feeling like an alternate version. It just feels like just a little bit of a cleaner version. And that is it. That is our ranking of all of the Everdell expansions from 5 to 1. Well, the big box ones at least. And we do like all of them, but honestly, number 1 is Bellaire with a bullet.
Although Newleaf is pretty close. I was really impressed. And we played it a few times already and really looking forward to playing it more. That's a lot of great stuff. But let us know what your favorite expansion is in the comments. And please like, subscribe, and hopefully we'll see you for the next one.